The gunshot that shattered the morning silence wasn't meant for Natalie Crawford. But it changed her life forever when the bullet struck the wooden post inches from where she stood outside her father's general store in Silverton, Colorado. It was the spring of 1882, and tensions between rival cattle operations had turned the usually peaceful mountain town into a powder keg waiting to explode. Natalie's heart hammered as she pressed herself against the storefront, her basket of fresh bread tumbling to the dusty ground. The shot had come from somewhere down Main Street, where two groups of ranch hands faced each other with hands hovering over their revolvers. She recognized some of them as men who worked for Marcus Thornton, the wealthiest rancher in the San Juan Mountains, and others who rode for the smaller outfits that Thornton was systematically trying to squeeze out. Before another shot could ring out, a figure moved with startling speed between the two groups. A cowboy Natalie had seen around town but never spoken to stepped into the line of fire with his hands raised, palms out in a gesture of peace. He wore simple clothes, worn leather chaps over faded denim, a dusty brown hat, and a red bandana around his neck. There was nothing remarkable about his appearance except for the calm authority in his voice as it carried across the street. "That's enough," he said, his tone steady and firm. "Whatever grievance you boys think you have, it isn't worth dying over. It sure as hell isn't worth killing an innocent woman over." The men on both sides seemed to deflate slightly. The cowboy continued, "Tommy, put that iron away. Jake, you too. You all know this isn't the way to settle things. Take it up with your bosses, take it to the sheriff, but don't turn our town into a battlefield." Remarkably, the men complied. The tension didn't disappear entirely, but weapons were holstered and the groups separated, moving off in opposite directions with muttered threats and curses. The cowboy turned and walked directly toward Natalie, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. As he drew closer, she could see his face clearly for the first time. He had strong, weathered features, sun-bronzed skin, and eyes the color of sage that held both kindness and a deep weariness. "Are you all right, miss?" he asked, crouching to help her gather the scattered loaves of bread. "I am, thanks to you," Natalie managed, her voice still shaky. "That was incredibly brave, or incredibly foolish." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "My mother always said there was a fine line between the two." He handed her the basket, now refilled with dusty bread. "I'm sorry about your goods. That stray bullet could have done a lot worse than knock over your basket." "Better the bread than me," Natalie said, attempting humor to settle her nerves. "I'm Natalie Crawford. My father owns the general store." "Daniel Foster, madam. Most folks just call me Danny. I work at the Patterson Ranch, or what's left of it." Natalie had heard about the Patterson Ranch. It was one of several smaller operations that Marcus Thornton had been pressuring to sell. The Pattersons were stubborn, refusing to give up the land that had been in their family for 15 years, but everyone in Silverton knew it was only a matter of time. Thornton had ways of getting what he wanted. "I should let you get back to your business," Daniel said, tipping his hat. "Just wanted to make sure you were unharmed." "Wait," Natalie called as he turned to leave. "Let me at least buy you a cup of coffee. It's the least I can do." He hesitated, and she could see him weighing the propriety of it. Natalie knew what he was thinking. She was 20 years old and from a respectable family. He was just a cowboy, probably close to her age, maybe a year or two older, working for failing ranch with no prospects beyond his next day's wages. In the rigid social structure of even a small mountain town like Silverton, there was a divide between them, but something in his eyes made her want to know more about this man who had stepped between guns to protect strangers. Something about the way he had handled the situation with quiet confidence rather than bravado appealed to her. She had spent too much time around men who confused volume with authority, who measured their worth in acres and cattle and the weight of their pocket watches. "I suppose one cup of coffee never hurt anyone," Daniel finally said, that slight smile returning. They walked together to the small restaurant attached to the Silverton Hotel. The morning crowd had thinned out, and they found a table by the window overlooking the street. Daniel removed his hat and set it on the chair beside him, and Natalie noticed his dark brown hair was slightly too long, curling at his collar. He moved with an economy of motion that suggested someone who worked hard for every dollar and didn't waste anything, not even energy. The waitress, an older woman named Martha who had known Natalie since she was a child, brought them coffee and gave Natalie a questioning look that she chose to ignore. Let people talk. Silverton was a small town, and gossip was its favorite pastime. "You said you work for the Pattersons," Natalie began, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. "How long have you been with them?" "3 years now," Daniel said. "Came up from Texas after my father passed. My mother had died when I was 16, and after Pa was gone, there wasn't anything keeping me there. I drifted for a while, worked ranches from the Panhandle up through New Mexico, and finally ended up here. The Pattersons gave me a job when I needed one, treated me fair, and I have stayed loyal to them. Even though things are difficult now, especially because things are difficult now." Daniel's expression grew serious. "Mr. Patterson is a good man, his wife too. They have got a daughter about your age. They don't deserve what Thornton is doing to them." Natalie felt a chill run through her despite the warm coffee. What exactly is he doing? Making life impossible. He owns the water rights to most of the good grazing land in the valley. He has been cutting off access, driving up the price of feed, buying out the businesses in town that the smaller ranchers depend on. Legal mostly, but cruel. Some things aren't legal, though. Fences get cut, cattle go missing, accidents happen. Nothing anyone can prove, but everyone knows. "Why doesn't the sheriff do something?" Daniel's laugh was bitter. "Sheriff Morton. He knows which side his bread is buttered on. Thornton practically owns this town, and what he doesn't own, he controls. The sheriff isn't going to bite the hand that feeds him." Natalie knew he was right. Her father had complained about it often enough. How Marcus Thornton had his fingers in every pie. How he was consolidating power and wealth while good people struggled. But her father had also told her something else, something she hadn't shared with anyone yet, something that made her stomach twist with anxiety. "Marcus Thornton wants to marry me," she said quietly, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. Daniel's head snapped up, his eyes searching her face. "What? He approached my father last month, made his intentions clear. He is a widower, as you probably know. His wife died 2 years ago, and he has decided he wants another. He chose me." The words tasted like ashes in her mouth. "And what did your father say?" He said yes. Natalie felt tears prick at her eyes but refused to let them fall. "Or rather, he said he would consider it favorably. We are not wealthy, Mr. Foster. The store does well enough, but we are not rich. My mother has been ill for years, and the medical expenses have been substantial. Thornton offered to pay for her care, to settle my father's debts, to ensure my family's security. All he wants in return is my hand in marriage." "That's not marriage, that's a business transaction," Daniel said, his voice tight with anger. "You are not cattle to be bought and sold. Maybe not, but I am a daughter who loves her mother. I am a daughter who doesn't want to see her father lose everything he has worked for. Thornton made it clear that if I refuse, things will become very difficult for my family. He didn't threaten openly, but the implication was there." They sat in silence for a long moment. Natalie didn't know why she had told this stranger something she hadn't even fully confessed to her closest friends. Perhaps it was because he had already shown himself to be brave, to be someone who stood up for what was right even when it was dangerous. Perhaps it was because she desperately needed someone to tell her she was wrong, that she didn't have to sacrifice her own happiness for her family's security. "What do you want?" Daniel asked finally. The question surprised her. No one had asked her that. Her father had told her what Thornton wanted. Her mother, from her sick, had cried and said she didn't want to be a burden. Her friends had whispered that she should be grateful, that Marcus Thornton was one of the most eligible men in Colorado, that she would never want for anything. But no one had asked what Natalie herself wanted. "I want to make my own choice," she said. "I want to marry for love, not for money. I want a partnership, not a purchase. I want what my parents had before illness and debt changed everything. They loved each other truly. I remember seeing them laugh together, seeing my father kiss my mother's hand like she was the most precious thing in the world. That's what I want. But I don't think I am going to get it." Daniel reached across the table and, with a gentleness that surprised her, placed his hand over hers. "Don't give up yet. You deserve to have your own choice. Every person does. That's what makes us human, not cattle." His touch sent a warmth through her that had nothing to do with the coffee. Natalie looked at their joined hands and felt something shift inside her, something she couldn't quite name but recognized as important. When she looked up and met his eyes, she saw her own feelings reflected there. Surprise, recognition, and the first spark of something that could become much more. The moment was broken by the door slamming open. Martha looked up with a scowl at the loud entrance, but her expression quickly changed to forced politeness. Marcus Thornton strode into the restaurant with the confidence of a man who owned everything he surveyed. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in expensive clothes that wouldn't have looked out of place in Denver or San Francisco. His dark hair was slicked back with pomade, his mustache precisely trimmed. He was handsome in a cold, calculating way, and he was 42 years old, more than twice Natalie's age. "Natalie, my dear," Thornton said, his voice carrying across the room. "I heard about the incident this morning. I came as soon as I could to ensure you were unharmed." Daniel slowly withdrew his hand, and Natalie immediately missed its warmth. She stood as Thornton approached, years of ingrained politeness overriding her personal feelings. "I am fine, Mr. Thornton. Thank you for your concern." Thornton's eyes flicked to Daniel, a dismissive glance that categorized and rejected him in an instant. "I see you have found an escort. How fortunate, though perhaps not the most appropriate companion for a lady of your standing." "Mr. Foster saved my life," Natalie said, her voice cool. "He prevented what could have been a tragedy when your men and the others were shooting in the street." "My men?" Thornton's eyebrows rose in exaggerated surprise. "I am sure if any of my employees were involved in such an unseemly display, it was in self-defense. I run a respectable operation, as you well know." Daniel stood, placing his hat back on his head. His movements were calm, but Natalie could see the tension in his shoulders. "Your men started it, Thornton. Everyone on the street saw it. Maybe if you stopped pushing people until they break, we would have a more peaceful town." Thornton's expression hardened. "I don't believe I know you. Though the insolence suggests you are one of Patterson's strays. You should be careful, boy. Men in your position can find themselves without employment very easily." "Is that a threat?" "It's an observation based on economic realities. The small ranches are dying. It's simply the way of progress. The strong survive and prosper. The weak fade away. That's nature, and I am just working with nature, not against it." Natalie stepped between them before the confrontation could escalate. Thank you both for your concern, but I really must get back to the store. My father will be wondering where I am. Allow me to escort you, Thornton said, offering his arm in a way that made it clear refusal would be an insult. Natalie hesitated, her eyes meeting Daniel's for just a moment. She saw understanding there and frustration, and something deeper that made her heart beat faster. But she also saw resignation. He knew, as she did, that she had no real choice in this moment. To publicly refuse Thornton would embarrass him, and an embarrassed Marcus Thornton was a dangerous thing. Of course, she said, placing her hand lightly on his arm. Good day, Mr. Foster. Thank you again for your help. Madam, Daniel said, tipping his hat, but his eyes said much more. They said this wasn't over. They said he understood. They said, impossibly for two people who had just met, that he cared what happened to her. As Thornton led her out of the restaurant, Natalie felt as though she were walking away from something precious, something that could have changed her life if only circumstances were different. Thornton talked as they walked, his voice a smooth drone about his ranch, his cattle, his plans for expansion. She heard none of it. Her mind was still in that restaurant, still feeling the gentle pressure of Daniel Foster's hand on hers, still seeing the quiet strength in his eyes. You are not paying attention, my dear, Thornton said, his tone chiding but still pleasant. I was explaining the improvements I am planning for the main house. After our wedding, of course. I want you to feel it is your home, not just mine. Mr. Thornton, I haven't agreed to marry you, Natalie said carefully. Not yet, but you will. His confidence was absolute, unshakable. Your father and I have an understanding. He knows what is best for you and what is best for your family. I can provide you with a life of comfort and security. You will want for nothing. Except love, Natalie thought. Except choice. Except my own life. They reached the general store and Thornton finally released her arm. I will call on you tomorrow evening, he said. We have much to discuss regarding our future together. I am thinking a wedding in the fall would be appropriate. That gives us time to make proper arrangements. I want everyone in Colorado to know that Marcus Thornton can provide the finest wedding for his bride. He didn't wait for her response, simply tipped his expensive hat and strode away toward his waiting horse, a magnificent black stallion that probably cost more than most people in Silverton earned in a year. Natalie watched him go, feeling trapped and helpless, like a rabbit caught in a snare with no hope of escape. The bell above the door chimed as she entered the store. Her father, Robert Crawford, looked up from the ledger he was reviewing. He was a thin man, worn down by worry and work, his hair more gray than brown now, his face lined with stress. There you are, he said. I heard about the trouble. Are you hurt? No, Papa. A cowboy named Daniel Foster intervened before anyone was seriously injured. Foster, I know him. He comes in sometimes for supplies for the Patterson Ranch. Good man, from what I can tell. Quiet, pays his bills on time when he has money. That's more than can be said for some. He returned his attention to the ledger, making notations with a pencil stub. Thornton was here looking for you. I told him you had gone to deliver bread to the hotel. I saw him. He found me. Natalie set down her basket and moved behind the counter, automatically beginning to straighten the goods on display. Her hands needed something to do. He is very taken with you, Natalie. You could do much worse. I could also do much better. Her father's head snapped up, his eyes sharp. Better? Better how? Better than one of the richest men in the territory. Better than someone who can ensure you never struggle, never worry about money, never watch your mother suffer because we cannot afford the doctors she needs. The words hit like physical blows. Natalie felt tears burn in her eyes. Is that what this is about? You are selling me to pay for mother's medical care. Don't be dramatic. No one is selling anyone. But yes, Thornton's support would ensure your mother receives the best treatment available. It would also mean you would be cared for, protected, provided for. Do you think I want to see you end up like so many women out here, worn down by hard work and poverty, old before your time? Thornton can give you a good life, but not a happy one. Her father closed the ledger with a sharp snap. Happiness is a luxury, Natalie. Security is a necessity. You are old enough to understand that now. I am not saying you must marry him tomorrow. I am saying you should seriously consider his proposal, for yourself and for this family. Natalie turned away, not trusting herself to speak without her voice breaking. She understood her father's position, understood the impossible weight he carried trying to keep the store afloat and pay for her mother's care. But understanding didn't make it hurt less. It didn't make the cage feel any less confining. The rest of the day passed in a blur of customers and routine tasks. Natalie measured flour and sugar, counted out nails and ammunition, wrapped purchases in brown paper and made polite conversation. But her mind was elsewhere. It kept returning to those few moments in the restaurant, to the feeling of Daniel Foster's hand on hers, to the words he had spoken. You deserve to have your own choice. Did she? In this world, in this time and place, did a woman really have choices? Or were those just comforting lies people told themselves while they did what they had to do to survive? The sun was setting behind the mountains when the store finally closed. Natalie helped her father lock up, then walked through the back to their living quarters. Their home was modest but comfortable, a few rooms attached to the store. Her mother lay in bed in the main bedroom, propped up on pillows, a book open in her lap. Sarah Crawford had once been a vibrant woman, full of life and laughter. Illness had stolen much of that, leaving her frail and pale, but her eyes still held warmth when she saw her daughter. "There is my girl," Sarah said, her voice weak but pleased. "Come, sit with me. Tell me about your day." Natalie settled into the chair beside the bed and took her mother's thin hand. "There was some excitement this morning. Some men were fighting in the street and a bullet nearly hit me." "Oh my God, Natalie," Sarah struggled to sit up straighter. "Are you hurt?" No, I am fine." A cowboy stopped the fight before anyone was seriously injured, but it frightened me. This town is becoming too wild, too dangerous. Sarah's brow furrowed with worry. "Your father and I have been talking. We think perhaps you should marry Mr. Thornton sooner rather than later. His ranch is safer, more protected. You would be away from this violence." "Mother, please, not you too." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I know you don't love him, sweetheart. I know this isn't what you dreamed of as a little girl, but sometimes we must be practical. I am dying, Natalie." "Don't shake your head. We both know it's true. The doctors have done what they can, but this consumption is taking me bit by bit. I don't want to leave this world knowing you are struggling, knowing your father might lose the store, knowing you have no security. If my death can be made easier by knowing you are cared for, then that's something." "Your death," Natalie's voice cracked. "Mother, don't talk like that. You are not dying. You just need rest and good care and miracles I am not going to receive. Be realistic, my darling girl. And be kind to your father. He is doing what he thinks is best. We both are." Sarah squeezed Natalie's hand with what little strength she had. "Promise me you will think about it. Really think about it. Not with your heart, but with your head. Thornton may not be the love of your life, but he can give you a life. That matters more than you might think." Natalie sat with her mother until the older woman drifted off to sleep, exhausted by the conversation. Then she went to her own small room and sat by the window, staring out at the darkening streets of Silverton. The mountains rose like dark giants against the deepening blue sky, their peaks still touched with the last rays of sunlight. She thought about what her parents had said, about their very real fears and concerns. She thought about her mother's illness and her father's desperate attempt to keep their family afloat. She thought about duty and responsibility and the weight of being a good daughter. And then she thought about Daniel Foster's eyes, sage green and kind, and the way his voice had sounded when he said she deserved to have her own choice. She thought about the warmth of his hand on hers, the strength she had sensed in him, not the strength of dominance but the strength of character. She thought about how he had stepped between armed men not to prove his bravery but simply because it was the right thing to do. Was it possible to have both? Security and love, duty and happiness. Or was her mother right that such things were luxuries, dreams for people who didn't have to worry about survival? Natalie didn't have answers, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She wasn't ready to give up yet. She wasn't ready to accept that her life had been decided by circumstances and other people's needs. If there was even a chance at something more, something real and true, she had to try to find it. The next morning, Natalie rose before dawn and dressed in her simplest work dress, pulling her dark blonde hair back in a practical braid. She left a note for her father saying she was going to deliver some goods to a customer outside town, which wasn't entirely a lie. The Patterson ranch was outside town, and she did intend to bring them something, even if it was just bread she had baked before anyone else was awake. The ride out to the Patterson place took nearly an hour on the horse she borrowed from the livery. The morning air was crisp and cool, the sky brightening from black to gray to pale gold as the sun climbed over the eastern mountains. Silverton sat at nearly 9,000 feet elevation, and the air was thin and pure, scented with pine and sage. The Patterson Ranch was smaller than Thornton's sprawling operation, but still substantial, a collection of buildings nestled in a valley with good grazing land and access to a creek that ran year-round. As Natalie approached, she could see men working in the corrals, horses being saddled, the smoke of breakfast fires rising from the bunkhouse chimney. A man she recognized as Tom Patterson came out of the main house as she rode up. He was in his 50s, weathered and lean, with kind eyes and a suspicious expression that softened when he recognized her. "Miss Crawford, this is unexpected. Is everything all right?" "Yes, Mr. Patterson. I am sorry to arrive unannounced. I was hoping I might speak with Mr. Foster if he is available." Patterson's eyebrows rose slightly, but he was too polite to comment. "Danny's out in the north pasture checking fences. I can send someone to fetch him." "Actually, if you could point me in the right direction, I would be happy to ride out there myself. I don't want to interrupt anyone's work." "It's about a mile that way," Patterson said, pointing toward a line of trees. "Follow the fence line and you will find him." "But Miss Crawford, may I ask what this is about? Danny's a good man, one of my best hands. I wouldn't want to see him caught up in anything that might cause him trouble." "I just want to talk to him, Mr. Patterson. I promise I mean him no harm." Patterson studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right then. You be careful out there. The terrain can be tricky if you don't know it." Natalie followed his directions, guiding her horse along a well-worn path that paralleled the fence line. The morning was beautiful, the kind of clear mountain day that made everything seem possible. Birds sang in the trees, and somewhere in the distance, she could hear the rushing of the creek. She found Daniel working on a section of fence that had been cut, the wire lying in loose coils on the ground. He had his back to her, hammering a new post into place, his shirt damp with sweat despite the cool morning air. His horse, a brown gelding with a white star on its forehead, grazed peacefully nearby. "Mr. Foster," Natalie called out. Daniel spun around, his hand instinctively moving toward the gun at his hip before he recognized her. Then his expression shifted from alarm to surprise to something that looked almost like joy before he schooled it into politeness. "Miss Crawford, what are you doing out here? I wanted to see you, to talk to you." Natalie dismounted, her legs slightly unsteady after the ride. "I hope I am not intruding." "Not intruding, just surprised." Daniel set down his hammer and walked toward her. "How did you know where to find me?" "Mr. Patterson gave me directions." "This is the second time this week your fence has been cut, isn't it?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "Third, actually. Someone cut the south pasture fence 2 nights ago. We lost about a dozen head of cattle before we noticed. Thornton's men found them conveniently wandering onto his land. He is offering to sell them back to us at a premium, claiming salvage rights. That's theft. It's business, according to the law, or at least according to Sheriff Morton's interpretation of the law." Daniel leaned against the post he had just secured, studying her face. "You didn't ride all the way out here to discuss stolen cattle. What's really going on, Miss Crawford?" "Natalie." "Please call me Natalie." "All right, Natalie. What brings you here?" She took a deep breath, trying to organize her tumbling thoughts. "Yesterday, when we talked, you asked me what I wanted. No one has asked me that in so long that I had almost forgotten I was allowed to want anything. I have spent so much time thinking about what my parents need, what my father expects, what Thornton demands, that I forgot to think about what I actually want for myself." "And what do you want?" "I don't know yet. But I know I don't want to marry Marcus Thornton. I know I don't want my life decided by other people's needs and expectations. And I know that when you touched my hand yesterday, I felt something I have never felt before. Something real and true and worth fighting for, even if I have only just met you." Daniel's eyes widened slightly. "Natalie, I am a ranch hand. I earn $30 a month when times are good, less when they are not. I own 2 horses, a saddle, some clothes, and a rifle. That's my entire fortune. I can't offer you the things Thornton can. I can't give you security or comfort or a fine house. No, but you could offer me honesty, respect, partnership, maybe even love in time." She stepped closer to him, her heart pounding. "Yesterday you said wealth is measured in happiness, not in dollars. Did you mean that?" "I said that." "Well, not exactly, but it was implied." Natalie felt a smile tug at her lips despite her nervousness. "I think what you were trying to say is that a person's worth isn't determined by their bank account, that there are more important things than money." Daniel was quiet for a long moment, his expression serious. "That's easy to say when you are not watching your mother waste away because you can't afford proper medical care. That's easy to say when you are not staring at ledgers every night trying to figure out how to pay your debts. I know what it's like to be poor, Natalie. I know what it's like to go hungry, to watch people you love suffer because you don't have enough money to help them. So yes, I believe happiness matters more than wealth. But I also know that a certain amount of security is necessary for happiness to even be possible." "So you are saying I should marry Thornton?" "No. Hell no. I am saying this is complicated and you need to think carefully about what you are willing to give up. If you refuse Thornton, what happens to your family? If you run away with a penniless cowboy, how will your mother receive care? These are real questions with real consequences." "I know that." Natalie felt frustration building inside her. "Do you think I haven't thought about this? Do you think I haven't lain awake every night for the past month trying to figure out a solution? I am not a fool, Daniel. I am not some romantic girl who thinks love conquers all. But I also don't think I should have to sacrifice my entire future to save my family. There has to be another way. If there is, I haven't found it, and I have been looking." Daniel pushed off from the post and walked toward his horse, running a hand through his dark hair in a gesture of frustration. "The system is rigged. People like Thornton control everything. They own the land, the water, the businesses, the law. They make the rules and the rest of us just try to survive inside those rules. Every time someone tries to challenge them, they get crushed. Then maybe it's time to stop playing by their rules. Daniel turned back to her, his expression sharp with interest. What do you mean? Natalie wasn't entirely sure herself. The idea was forming even as she spoke, pieces clicking together in her mind. Thornton's power comes from his wealth, and his wealth comes from his ranch. What if the ranch wasn't as profitable as it should be? What if the smaller ranches united against him instead of letting him pick them off one by one? What if there was an alternative to his stranglehold on the water rights and grazing land? There isn't. He bought up those rights legally. There's no way to challenge them. Not legally, maybe. But there are other ways. Ways to make his operation more expensive, more difficult, less profitable. Ways to help the smaller ranches survive and even thrive despite his attempts to crush them. Natalie was warming to the idea now, seeing possibilities. My father's store supplies most of the ranches in the area. What if we found ways to give the smaller operations better terms, better prices? What if we helped them organize, pool their resources? That would put your father directly in Thornton's crosshairs. He would retaliate. He is already retaliating by forcing me into marriage. We are already targets. We just haven't been fighting back. Natalie stepped closer to Daniel again, close enough to see the gold flecks in his sage green eyes. I am tired of being passive. I am tired of accepting that powerful men get to decide everything while the rest of us just nod and smile. If I am going to go down, I want to go down fighting. A slow smile spread across Daniel's face, transforming his features from merely handsome to something that made Natalie's breath catch. You are not at all what I expected. What did you expect? A proper town lady, someone sweet and delicate who needed protecting. But you are fierce. You are a fighter. He reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair that had escaped from her braid away from her face. I like that. I like that a lot. His touch sent warmth cascading through her body. Natalie leaned into it, letting herself feel the connection between them. So you will help me. You will fight with me. I will. Though I should warn you, I am probably going to fall in love with you somewhere along the way. Probably? All right, definitely. Almost certainly already have if I am being honest, which is foolish and impractical and probably going to end in disaster, but I can't seem to help myself. Natalie laughed, a genuine sound of joy that surprised her. At least you are honest about it. That's more than Thornton has ever been. He wants to own me like he owns everything else. You are offering me a partnership. And poverty, don't forget the poverty. Wealth is measured in happiness, Natalie said, throwing his implied words back at him. You said so yourself. I am going to regret that statement, aren't I? Probably. They stood there for a moment, grinning at each other like fools, and Natalie felt lighter than she had in months. The problems hadn't disappeared. The threats were still real. But she wasn't facing them alone anymore. And that made all the difference. The sound of hoofbeats interrupted the moment. Daniel's hand moved back to his gun, his body tensing as he turned toward the approaching riders. 3 men crested the hill, and Natalie recognized the lead rider immediately. Marcus Thornton sat astride his black stallion, flanked by 2 of his ranch hands. His face was cold with anger. Well, well, Thornton said, his voice dripping with false pleasantness. Isn't this cozy, my fiancé, alone with a hired hand? How improper. I am not your fiancé, Natalie said clearly. I never agreed to marry you, Mr. Thornton. Your father gave his blessing, that's all the agreement I need. But I can see now that I have been too patient, too understanding. Clearly, you need more direct guidance. Thornton's eyes moved to Daniel, dismissing him like an insect. Foster, isn't it? I am giving you one chance to walk away. Get on your horse and ride. Leave Colorado entirely and I will forget I saw you here with my future wife. Stay and I will make you regret it." "I am not going anywhere," Daniel said calmly. "And Natalie is not your future wife. She is her own person, capable of making her own decisions." "Natalie." Thornton's voice went dangerously soft. "First names now, how intimate. Tell me, Foster, do you think your honor is worth dying for?" One of the men flanking Thornton moved his hand toward his gun. Daniel didn't flinch, didn't move, but Natalie could feel the tension radiating from him. She stepped between them, putting herself directly in the line of potential fire. "Stop this," she commanded. "Mr. Thornton, if you hurt Daniel or threaten him in any way, I promise you I will never marry you. Not if you paid my father $1 million. Not if my mother's life depended on it. I will run away. I will cause such a scandal that your name will be ruined throughout the territory." "Do you understand me?" Thornton's face went red with fury. "You don't give me orders, girl. You don't threaten me. Do you have any idea who I am? What I can do? I know exactly who you are. You are a bully and a thief who hides behind money and lawyers. You are a man so empty inside that the only way you can feel powerful is by controlling others. And I am done being controlled by you or anyone else." For a moment, Natalie thought Thornton might actually strike her. His hand rose, trembling with rage, and she braced herself. But Daniel moved with startling speed, putting himself between Natalie and Thornton, his own hand now resting on his gun. "Don't," Daniel said quietly. "Don't even think about it." The standoff lasted for several heartbeats. Then Thornton lowered his hand, his expression shifting from rage to cold calculation. When he spoke again, his voice was perfectly controlled, which somehow made it more frightening. "You have made a very serious mistake, both of you. Miss Crawford, your father will be hearing about this. I imagine his creditors will be very interested to know that I am withdrawing my offer of assistance. Foster, I hope you enjoy your last few days of employment. Patterson's ranch will be mine by the end of the month, one way or another. And as for you two and this pathetic little romance, let me make something very clear. I always get what I want. Always. If I decide I still want Natalie as my wife despite her deplorable behavior, I will have her. If I decide I want you dead, Foster, you will be dead. The only question is how much suffering I inflict on everyone around you before I am done." With that, Thornton wheeled his horse around and rode away, his men following. The three figures disappeared over the hill, leaving Daniel and Natalie alone once more. "That went well," Daniel said dryly. Natalie found herself shaking, the adrenaline of the confrontation catching up with her. "I may have just destroyed my family." "No, Thornton was already destroying your family. He was just doing it slowly, making it seem like a favor instead of a hostile takeover. At least now the battle lines are clear." "What do we do now?" Daniel turned to face her fully, taking both of her hands in his. "Now we fight. But Natalie, you need to understand what that means. Thornton wasn't bluffing. He will come after your father's store. He will make things as difficult as possible for your family. He will try to turn the whole town against us. Are you prepared for that? Are you trying to scare me into changing my mind? I am trying to make sure you know what you are getting into. This isn't going to be some romantic adventure. It's going to be hard and scary, and there's a real chance we lose everything." Natalie thought about her mother, lying sick in bed. She thought about her father's worried face as he pored over ledgers late at night. She thought about the weight of expectation and duty that had been pressing down on her for so long. And then she thought about the alternative. A loveless marriage to a cruel man, a life of pretty captivity, years stretching ahead with no hope of real happiness. "I would rather fight and lose than surrender without trying," she said finally. I would rather have one day of living my own life than a lifetime of being someone else's possession. Daniel's smile was fierce and proud. Then we fight together, partners, partners. He pulled her close, and Natalie went willingly, letting herself be held. His arms were strong around her, his heart beating steady against her ear. She felt safe there, safer than she had felt in a long time, even though she knew they were walking into danger. "We should get back," Daniel said after a moment. "You need to warn your father about what happened, and I need to talk to Mr. Patterson, prepare him for whatever Thornton tries next." They rode back to the ranch together, their horses walking side by side. Tom Patterson was waiting in the yard, his expression worried. When he saw them together, his worry deepened. "I saw Thornton and his men riding hell for leather toward town. What happened out there?" Daniel quickly explained the confrontation. Patterson listened carefully, his face growing more troubled with each word. "This is bad," Patterson said when Daniel finished. "Danny, I appreciate your loyalty, but maybe you should move on. If Thornton has targeted you specifically, staying here just puts everyone at risk." "With respect, sir, I am not running. He has already targeted you and your ranch. Me leaving won't change that. At least if I stay, you have another hand who knows what's coming." "And what about you, Miss Crawford?" Patterson turned to Natalie. "You have put yourself directly in Thornton's path." "That takes courage, but courage doesn't stop bullets." "I am not afraid of Marcus Thornton," Natalie said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "And I think there might be a way to fight back. May I speak with you and your wife? I have an idea." Patterson looked skeptical but nodded. "All right, come inside. Ellen will want to hear this too." Ellen Patterson was a sturdy woman in her late 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Their daughter, Lucy, was there as well, a young woman about Natalie's age with her mother's practical air. They all gathered around the kitchen table while Natalie explained her idea. "The smaller ranches can't fight Thornton individually," she began. "He picks you off one at a time, using his money and influence to strangle you slowly. But what if you united? What if all the small operators pooled their resources, shared costs, helped each other? A cooperative, essentially." "Thornton controls the water rights," Tom Patterson objected. "He controls access to the best grazing land. How does working together change that?" "By finding alternatives. There's water in the high country that he doesn't control. It would be harder to access, require more work, but it's there. As for grazing land, what if some of the ranches specialized in different things? Some focus on cattle, others on horses, others on sheep. Diversification makes you less vulnerable to his manipulation of any one market." "And how do we sell our goods with Thornton controlling most of the buyers?" Ellen asked. "We find new buyers. We pool resources to ship directly to Denver or even further east. My father has contacts with merchants in other territories. We bypass Thornton's network entirely." Lucy Patterson leaned forward, her eyes bright with interest. "That could work. It would be hard, it would take time, but it could work." "It would also paint an even bigger target on all our backs," Tom said. "Miss Crawford, I appreciate what you are trying to do, but you are asking people to risk everything on an untested idea." "As opposed to what? Giving up? Letting Thornton take everything anyway?" Natalie met his eyes steadily. "Mr. Patterson, you are going to lose your ranch. Maybe not today, maybe not this month, but soon. Thornton has made that clear. So you can either lose it quietly, or you can fight and maybe, just maybe, win. At least if you fight, you go down with dignity." Tom and Ellen exchanged a long look, the kind of wordless communication that came from years of marriage. Finally, Ellen nodded slightly, and Tom sighed. "All right, I am willing to try, but we will need to talk to the other ranchers. Sanders, Mackenzie, the Johnson brothers. If even one of them refuses to join, the whole plan falls apart. Then we convince them, Daniel said. We show them there's another way. Over the next week, they worked tirelessly to bring the plan together. Daniel and Tom Patterson visited the other small ranches, laying out Natalie's proposal. Some were skeptical, some were afraid, but slowly, grudgingly, they began to come around. The alternative was simply too bleak to ignore. Meanwhile, Natalie faced the consequences of her confrontation with Thornton. True to his word, the wealthy rancher moved quickly to punish her family. Creditors who had been patient suddenly demanded immediate payment. Suppliers raised their prices. Customers who had frequented the store for years suddenly found reasons to shop elsewhere. Her father was beside himself with anger and fear. "What have you done?" he demanded the night after Thornton's visit to the ranch. "What were you thinking, gallivanting around with that cowboy, insulting the most powerful man in the county?" "I was thinking that I am a human being with my own thoughts and feelings, not a piece of property to be bought and sold," Natalie shot back. "I was thinking that I would rather fight for my own life than surrender it to someone who sees me as nothing more than another acquisition. And now we are all going to pay for your selfishness. Your mother needs medical care that we can no longer afford. The store is drowning in debt, all because you couldn't set aside your pride and do what was best for this family. Best for the family, or best for you. You were willing to sell your daughter to solve your problems, Papa. Don't pretend this was about anything noble." Robert's face went white, then red. Get out of my sight." Natalie fled to her room, tears streaming down her face. She heard her mother's weak voice calling her name but couldn't face her. Couldn't face the guilt and the pain, and the knowledge that her choice was causing suffering for people she loved. She cried herself to sleep that night, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. The next morning she woke to find a note slipped under her door. It was from Daniel, written in a careful, precise hand. "Meet me at the old mill outside town at noon. Don't tell anyone. Trust me. D.F." Natalie dressed carefully and slipped out of the house while her father was occupied with customers in the store. The old mill was an abandoned structure about 2 miles from town, a relic from Silverton's early mining days. She rode there alone, her heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. Daniel was waiting for her, along with Tom Patterson, Ellen, Lucy, and several other people Natalie recognized from around town. The Sanders family, the Mackenzies, the Johnson brothers, and a few others. About 20 people in all gathered in the shadowy interior of the mill. "What is this?" Natalie asked. "A meeting," Daniel said, stepping forward to greet her. "A gathering of everyone who is willing to stand against Thornton. Your idea, Natalie, it's working. People are listening." Tom Patterson stepped forward. "We have been discussing the cooperative idea. Most of us here have already started working together, sharing resources and information. But we wanted you here for this next part, Miss Crawford, because it was your vision that started it all. We are calling it the San Juan Cattlemen's Cooperative," Ellen said. "Every ranch that joins contributes what they can and receives help when they need it. We have pooled funds to hire a lawyer from Denver to challenge some of Thornton's water rights claims. Turns out a few of his acquisitions were not quite as legal as he claimed. And we have been talking to other merchants in town," added John Sanders, a weathered rancher in his 60s. "Your father is not the only one Thornton has been squeezing. The blacksmith, the feed store, even the hotel owner. They are all tired of being under his thumb. We are organizing them too." Natalie felt hope bloom in her chest for the first time in days. "This is wonderful, but what about my father? He is still in debt, still vulnerable." "We have a proposal for that too," Daniel said. "The cooperative needs a central supply point, somewhere to purchase goods in bulk, to coordinate shipments. Your father's store could serve that function. We would consolidate our purchasing through him, giving him reliable business that doesn't depend on Thornton's goodwill. He would never agree to it, not if it means going against Thornton. Then we convince him, show him the numbers, show him that this is viable. Daniel took her hands, his eyes intense. Natalie, this can work. It's not going to be easy and it's not going to be quick, but we have a real chance here. A chance to break Thornton's stranglehold on this valley. But we need you. We need your intelligence and your courage and your belief that things can be different. Around them, the others nodded their agreement. These were hard people, worn by work and weather, but there was a light in their eyes that hadn't been there before. Hope. Purpose. The possibility of a different future. What do you need me to do? Natalie asked. Over the next several weeks, the cooperative took shape. It was difficult, frustrating work. There were setbacks and arguments and moments when it seemed like the whole thing would collapse. Thornton didn't sit idle. He increased pressure on the participating ranches, calling in debts, raising prices, using every tool at his disposal to crush the rebellion before it could gain momentum. But the cooperative held together. When the Sanders family lost a barn to a mysterious fire, the others helped rebuild it. When the Mackenzies' cattle were rustled, the cooperative's shared resources allowed them to absorb the loss without going under. Slowly, painfully, they built something stronger than any individual ranch could be. Natalie worked tirelessly, coordinating between the ranches and the town merchants, keeping records, finding new buyers for their goods. She discovered she had a talent for organization and negotiation, skills she had never known she possessed. Daniel was beside her through all of it, a steady presence and constant support. Their relationship deepened as they worked together. Stolen moments became stolen hours, conversations that lasted late into the night as they planned and dreamed and imagined a future together. The attraction Natalie had felt that first day grew into something deeper, something that made her heart ache with its intensity. One evening, as they sat together on the porch of the Patterson ranch house watching the sun set behind the mountains, Daniel turned to her with a serious expression. "I need to tell you something," he said, "about my past, about why I left Texas. You don't have to explain yourself to me. I want to. You should know who I really am before we go any further." Daniel took a deep breath. "My father was a rancher, not wealthy but comfortable. When I was 17, a man named Gideon Black started buying up land around us, same as Thornton is doing here. My father refused to sell. Black got impatient, decided to take more direct action. He hired men to attack our ranch, burn us out." Natalie reached for his hand, sensing the pain in his voice. "My father fought back. He was a stubborn man, proud. He gathered some of our hands, some neighbors who were also being threatened, and they went after Black's men. There was a gunfight. 3 of Black's men died, along with my father and 2 of our neighbors. I was there. I fired my gun. I don't know if I killed anyone, but I might have. In the chaos and the smoke and the fear, I might have ended a life." Daniel. After it was over, Black used his influence to get murder charges filed against everyone who had fought with my father. The ones who survived. I ran. I couldn't stay and fight because my mother needed me to be free, to be able to work and send money back to her. She died 6 months later anyway, from grief I think, and I have been drifting ever since. Running from what happened, from the guilt, from the possibility that I am the kind of person who kills others. You were protecting your family and your home. That's not murder, that's survival. The law didn't see it that way. Black bought the judges and the jury. The men who stayed to fight the charges were hanged. Daniel's voice broke slightly. I should have been there with them. I should have faced it instead of running. But I was scared, and I convinced myself that running was the practical choice, the smart choice. Natalie shifted closer to him, wrapping her arms around him. You can't carry that guilt forever. You were young and frightened and trying to protect your mother. You made the only choice you could. But it's happening again. Thornton is doing the same thing Black did, and I am helping organize resistance against him. What if it ends the same way? What if people die because of decisions I help make? Then we will face that together. But Daniel, what's the alternative? Letting bullies and tyrants have their way because we are too afraid to stand up to them. That's not living, that's just slow death. Daniel pulled back to look at her, his eyes searching her face. How did you get so wise? I am not wise. I am just tired of being afraid. Natalie cupped his face in her hands. I meant what I said before. I would rather fight and lose than surrender without trying. And I would rather have you by my side, with all your guilt and fear and complicated history, than anyone else in the world. I love you, Daniel said, the words tumbling out like he couldn't hold them back any longer. I know it's too soon. I know we have only known each other a few weeks, but I love you, Natalie Crawford. I love your courage and your fierce heart, and the way you refuse to accept the world as it is and keep fighting for the world as it should be. I love you too, Natalie whispered, and then his lips were on hers, kissing her with a passion and tenderness that made her entire body sing. She kissed him back, pouring everything she felt into it, all the fear and hope and desperate longing that had been building inside her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. We are probably going to have to fight for this, he said. For us, for the life we want together, it's not going to be easy. Nothing worth having ever is. They sat together as the stars came out, the vastness of the Colorado sky spreading above them like a promise. Natalie felt at peace for the first time since this all began, not because the problems had disappeared, but because she finally knew what she was fighting for. Not just freedom from Thornton's control, but the chance to build a life with this man who saw her as an equal, who respected her mind as much as her heart. The peace didn't last long. 3 days later, Marcus Thornton made his next move. Natalie's father was arrested on charges of fraud and theft. According to Thornton's lawyers, Robert Crawford had been systematically overcharging customers and falsifying records for years. The evidence was damning. Altered ledgers, statements from witnesses claiming they had been cheated, documentation of inflated prices. It was all false, carefully constructed lies, but presented with enough official weight to seem credible. Robert was taken to the county jail in a larger town 20 miles away. Natalie rushed there with Daniel, desperate to see her father, to understand what was happening. The sheriff, a man named Collins who wasn't in Thornton's pocket like Morton, allowed her a brief visit. Robert sat on the narrow cot in his cell, looking smaller and older than Natalie had ever seen him. His hands shook as he gripped the bars. "Papa, we are going to fix this. We are going to prove the charges are false." "It doesn't matter if they are false," Robert said, his voice hollow. "Thornton has the lawyers and the judges. He has the money to make this stick. I am going to prison, Natalie, or worse. And your mother will die alone because I wasn't there to care for her. Mama has me, and you are not going to prison. We will fight this." "How? With what? We have nothing. Thornton has everything." Robert's eyes filled with tears. "I should have made you marry him. I should have insisted. Then none of this would be happening." "Papa, no, don't say that. This is not my fault. This is Thornton's doing, not mine." But the guilt still ate at her as they left the jail. Daniel tried to comfort her, but she was lost in her own spiral of self-recrimination. Her choice to defy Thornton had led to this. Her desire for freedom and love had destroyed her family. The ride back to Silverton was silent. When they arrived in town, they found chaos. A crowd had gathered outside the general store, and smoke was rising from the building. Natalie kicked her horse into a gallop, Daniel right behind her. The fire had already been put out by the time they arrived, but the damage was extensive. The back room was completely destroyed, the living quarters blackened and ruined. Volunteers were hauling water, trying to save what they could of the merchandise and structure. Natalie pushed through the crowd, screaming for her mother. She found Sarah being tended to by the doctor, wrapped in a blanket and coughing violently. The older woman looked like a ghost, her face covered in soot, her eyes wild with fear. "Mama," Natalie fell to her knees beside her mother. "Are you hurt?" "The fire," Sarah gasped between coughs. "It started so fast. In the storage room, I barely made it out." "Someone said it deliberately," the doctor said grimly. "You can smell the kerosene. This wasn't an accident." Daniel appeared at Natalie's side, his face grim. "Thornton, he is escalating. First your father, now this. He is trying to destroy everything you have, so you will have no choice but to accept his terms." "He is going to kill us," Natalie said, the words cold and certain. "If we don't submit, he is going to kill us all. Then we don't give him the chance." Daniel's voice was hard, determined. "We end this, tonight." "What are you suggesting?" "A confrontation. Public, where he can't hide behind lawyers and hired guns. We force him to face what he is doing, make him answer for his crimes in front of the whole town." "That's suicide. He will have us killed." "Maybe. Or maybe people are finally angry enough to stand with us." "Look around, Natalie. Look at the faces in this crowd." She did, and she saw anger. The townspeople who had watched Thornton's tyranny for years, who had bent under his control because they had no choice, were finally reaching their breaking point. The fire had been too blatant, too obviously criminal. Even Thornton's allies looked uncomfortable. Tom Patterson pushed through the crowd. "We heard what happened. Danny, is this what I think it is? Thornton's work. Has to be. He is trying to break us." "Then we break him first. The cooperative, everyone involved, we are with you, whatever you need." Others chimed in, offering support, resources, courage. The movement Natalie and Daniel had started was no longer just a handful of struggling ranchers. It was something bigger, something that had captured the imagination and desperation of an entire community tired of living under one man's thumb. "We need a plan," Natalie said, her mind racing. "Something that exposes Thornton publicly, that makes it impossible for him to retaliate without revealing himself as the criminal he is." They gathered at the Patterson Ranch again that night, a much larger group than before. Nearly 50 people crowded into the barn, representing not just the ranches but the merchants, the townspeople, even a few of Thornton's own former employees who had grown disgusted with his methods. A plan emerged from the heated discussions and arguments. It was risky, potentially disastrous, but it was the only option they had left. They would confront Thornton at the town meeting scheduled for the following week. The meeting was supposed to address water rights and grazing permits, issues that Thornton had manipulated in his favor for years. They would use it as a platform to present evidence of his crimes, to force a public reckoning. The lawyer they had hired from Denver, a sharp young man named William Hayes, had been digging into Thornton's business dealings. He had found irregularities in property transfers, evidence of bribery, documentation of illegal water rights claims. It wasn't enough to guarantee a conviction, not with Thornton's money and influence, but it was enough to raise serious questions. "The key is getting the territorial governor's representative to attend," Hayes explained. "If we can show this evidence in front of someone with authority beyond the county level, someone Thornton doesn't control, we have a chance. A small chance, but a chance." "How do we get a representative here?" Someone asked. I already sent a telegram. Explained that there are serious allegations of corruption and criminal activity in Silverton, that the local authorities may be compromised. The governor's office is sending someone to observe the meeting. A murmur of hope ran through the gathered group. Natalie felt it too, fragile but real. They had a plan. They had support. They had a chance. The week that followed was the longest of Natalie's life. Her mother recovered slowly from the smoke inhalation, staying with friends since their living quarters were destroyed. Her father remained in jail, awaiting trial on the false charges. Natalie herself moved between different houses, never staying in one place too long, afraid that Thornton might try something more direct. Daniel barely left her side. He appointed himself her unofficial bodyguard, and Natalie was grateful for his presence. The danger was real and growing. 2 members of the cooperative had their horses shot out from under them on lonely roads. A barn belonging to the Johnson brothers burned down. The message was clear: withdraw or face consequences. But no one withdrew. If anything, the attacks only strengthened their resolve. The people of Silverton and the surrounding valley were done being victims. The night before the town meeting, Natalie couldn't sleep. She sat on the porch of the Patterson house, wrapped in a blanket against the cool mountain air, watching the stars wheel overhead. Daniel found her there, settling down beside her without a word. "Are you scared?" she asked finally. "Terrified," he admitted, "but also hopeful. Strange combination. If this goes wrong tomorrow, if Thornton wins, what will you do?" "Whatever I have to, run if necessary." "But Natalie, even if we lose tomorrow, we haven't lost everything. We have proved that people can stand together against tyranny. We have shown that resistance is possible. That matters, even if we don't win this particular battle. I want to win, though. I want to see Thornton face justice. I want my father freed, my mother cared for, our life restored. I want us to have a future together without constantly looking over our shoulders. We will have that future, I promise you. One way or another, we will find a way to be together." Daniel pulled her close and she rested her head on his shoulder. "When this is over, when the dust settles, I am going to ask you to marry me properly, with a ring and flowers and everything. And then I am going to spend the rest of my life making you happy. You already make me happy. Even in the middle of all this chaos and danger, you make me happy. That's how I know this is real, what we have. It survives everything trying to destroy it." They sat together until dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. It was time. The town meeting was held in the largest building available, the church. Every seat was filled, with people standing along the walls and crowding in the doorway. The air was thick with tension and anticipation. Thornton sat in the front row, flanked by his lawyers and some of his men. He looked supremely confident, like a man who had already won. Sheriff Morton called the meeting to order, but before he could begin the planned agenda, William Hayes stood up. "Before we discuss water rights and grazing permits, there are some allegations that need to be addressed. Serious allegations against Marcus Thornton regarding illegal business practices, bribery of public officials, and criminal conspiracy." The room erupted. Thornton's face went red with rage. Morton tried to restore order, but the crowd was having none of it. They wanted to hear what Hayes had to say. A man in the back of the room stood up, his voice cutting through the chaos. "I am Jonathan Wheeler, representative of the Territorial Governor's Office. I am here to observe these proceedings. Please continue, Mr. Hayes." Thornton's confident expression cracked slightly. This wasn't part of his plan. Hayes laid out the evidence methodically: false property transfers, bribed county officials, illegal manipulation of water rights, arson, theft, assault by proxy. He presented documents, witness statements, financial records that showed a pattern of criminal behavior stretching back years. Thornton's lawyers objected, argued, tried to discredit the evidence, but Hayes had done his work well. Every claim was supported, every accusation backed up with documentation. The case he presented wasn't just damning, it was overwhelming. When Hayes finished, the room was silent. Every eye was on Thornton, waiting to see how he would respond. He stood slowly, his face a mask of cold fury. These accusations are absurd, the ravings of jealous men who have failed in business and want someone to blame. I have built an empire through hard work and smart decisions. If that makes me a criminal in the eyes of these people, then our legal system is truly broken. What about my father? Natalie stood up, her voice ringing clear through the church. What about the false charges you brought against Robert Crawford? What about the fire that nearly killed my mother? What about the systematic campaign of terror you have waged against anyone who dares to oppose you? Careful, Miss Crawford. Slander is a serious charge. So is arson. So is attempted murder. So is everything you have done to this community. Natalie moved into the aisle, walking toward the front of the church. Daniel moved to follow her, but she shook her head slightly. This was something she needed to do alone. She stopped directly in front of Thornton, close enough to see the veins pulsing in his neck, the rage barely contained behind his eyes. "You wanted to marry me," she said quietly, but in the church's acoustics, everyone could hear. "You wanted to own me like you own everything else in this valley. But I am not for sale, Mr. Thornton. Neither is my father's store or the Patterson Ranch or anything else you have tried to steal. We are people, not property, and we are done being afraid of you." Thornton's hand moved toward her, and for a moment she thought he was going to strike her. But Daniel was there in an instant, catching Thornton's wrist in an iron grip. "Don't," Daniel said softly, dangerously. "Don't give me a reason." Thornton jerked his hand away, his eyes darting around the room. He was seeing, perhaps for the first time, that he was surrounded by people who hated him, people who had suffered under his control, people who were no longer afraid. "This isn't over," Thornton said, his voice low and venomous. "You think one meeting, one investigation changes anything? I have resources you can't imagine. I have connections at every level of government. I will destroy all of you." "No," Jonathan Wheeler said, standing up. "You won't." "Mr. Thornton, based on the evidence presented here today, I am recommending a full investigation by the territorial authorities. Your business dealings, your property acquisitions, all of it will be reviewed. If even half of what Mr. Hayes has presented is accurate, you will be facing criminal charges. You can't do this. I will have your job. You will do nothing. Because your power, Mr. Thornton, was always an illusion. It existed only as long as people believed in it, as long as they were too afraid or too isolated to challenge you. But look around. These people aren't afraid anymore. They have united against you, and that's something all your money and influence can't defeat." Thornton looked around the church, and Natalie saw the moment he realized he had lost. His empire, built on fear and corruption, was crumbling. The people he had terrorized for years were staring at him with defiance instead of submission. He turned and strode toward the exit, his lawyers and men scrambling to follow. At the doorway, he paused and looked back, his eyes finding Natalie's. "You could have had everything," he said. "Wealth, security, a position of respect. Instead, you chose a penniless cowboy and a losing battle. I hope your principles keep you warm at night, Miss Crawford, because poverty certainly won't." "Wealth is measured in happiness," Daniel said, stepping up beside Natalie and taking her hand. "Not in dollars. I think someone wise once told me that." Thornton's laugh was bitter. "We will see how wise you feel in a year, when you are still struggling to survive while I rebuild everything you think you have destroyed. This isn't over." But it was. Even Thornton knew it as he walked out of the church into the bright mountain sunlight. The territorial investigation moved forward swiftly. Within a month, several of Thornton's business associates had been arrested. His water rights claims were invalidated. His property acquisitions were reviewed, and many were found to be based on fraudulent documents or coerced sales. Thornton himself fled Colorado before he could be formally charged, disappearing into the territories with whatever liquid assets he could grab. Rumors said he went to California trying to start over. Others said he had gone to Mexico. Natalie didn't care. He was gone, and that was all that mattered. Her father was released from jail, the charges against him dismissed with formal apologies from the court. The general store was rebuilt with help from the cooperative, better than before. Her mother's health improved with proper medical care, which was now affordable without the crushing debt Thornton had engineered. The San Juan Cattlemen's Cooperative thrived. The small ranches, working together, found they could not only survive but prosper. They expanded their operations, found new markets, and built something sustainable. Tom Patterson became the cooperative's first president, with Daniel as his right-hand man. 6 months after the town meeting that changed everything, Daniel made good on his promise. He proposed to Natalie on the porch of the Patterson ranch, the same spot where they had sat together watching the stars the night before their confrontation with Thornton. He had a simple gold band, nothing fancy, but to Natalie, it was more precious than any diamond. "I don't have much to offer you," Daniel said, down on one knee. "I have a steady job, a horse, a saddle, and a heart that belongs completely to you, but I promise I will spend every day of my life trying to make you happy. I promise I will be your partner in everything, respecting your mind and your strength as much as I love your heart. I promise I will never try to own you or control you or make you less than you are. Will you marry me, Natalie Crawford?" "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, of course yes. They were married in the same church where they had faced down Thornton, surrounded by the community that had fought alongside them. It was a simple ceremony but filled with joy. Natalie wore a dress her mother had carefully sewn, white linen with lace at the collar. Daniel wore his best suit, borrowed from Tom Patterson and slightly too big, but he had never looked more handsome to her. Robert Crawford walked his daughter down the aisle with tears streaming down his face. He had apologized to Natalie more times than she could count for trying to force her into marriage with Thornton, for not supporting her choices, for letting his own fear blind him to what was right. She had forgiven him, understanding that he had been doing what he thought was necessary to protect his family, even if his methods had been wrong. The pastor spoke about love and partnership, about building a life together based on mutual respect and shared values. He spoke about courage, about standing up for what was right even when it was difficult. And then Daniel and Natalie exchanged their vows, promising to love and honor each other for all their days. When Daniel kissed her as her husband for the first time, the church erupted in cheers. Natalie felt like she was floating, held up by love and joy and the incredible relief of finally being free to choose her own path. The celebration lasted well into the night. There was music and dancing, food and laughter. Daniel spun Natalie around the makeshift dance floor until she was dizzy and breathless, both of them grinning like fools. "Happy?" he asked as they paused to catch their breath, deliriously. "You? I have never been happier in my life. I still can't quite believe you chose me." A simple cowboy with nothing but the clothes on his back. "You are not simple. You are brave and kind and wise. You see me as I truly am, not as someone to be managed or controlled. That's worth more than all of Thornton's money could ever be. Wealth is measured in happiness, Daniel repeated, that phrase that had become their private motto. And by that measure, I am the richest man in Colorado. They spent their wedding night in a room at the Silverton Hotel, finally alone after months of public struggle and private longing. Daniel was gentle and patient, taking his time, making sure Natalie felt safe and cherished. She had been nervous, uncertain about this final intimacy, but with Daniel it felt natural and right. This was what making love was supposed to be. A joining of not just bodies but souls, a physical expression of the emotional connection they had built. Afterward, they lay tangled together, the moonlight streaming through the window casting silver patterns on the sheets. Natalie traced the scars on Daniel's chest, marks from his hard life as a cowboy, and felt overwhelming tenderness for this man who had become her entire world. "What are you thinking?" Daniel asked, running his fingers through her loose hair. "That I am grateful. For all of it, even the hard parts, because those hard parts brought me to you. If Thornton hadn't tried to force me into marriage, if I hadn't refused, if you hadn't stepped in front of those guns that day on Main Street, we might never have found each other. I like to think we would have found each other eventually. Some things are just meant to be. You believe in fate. I believe in choices. I believe that every decision we make shapes our path. You chose to fight instead of surrender. I chose to stand with you instead of walking away. Those choices led us here. That's not fate, that's us creating our own future. Then let's keep making good choices. Let's build a life together that we can be proud of. Deal." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, safe and content and deeply in love. The years that followed were not always easy, but they were good. Daniel and Natalie bought a small ranch of their own, part of the cooperative's expansion. It was modest compared to Thornton's former empire, but it was theirs. They raised cattle and horses, working side by side from dawn until dusk. Natalie proved to be a skilled rancher, with a good eye for livestock and a head for business. She managed the books and handled sales while Daniel oversaw the day-to-day operations. They were true partners, making decisions together, supporting each other through successes and setbacks. 2 years after their wedding, their first child was born. A son whom they named Robert Thomas Foster, after both their fathers. He was a healthy, loud baby with Daniel's eyes and Natalie's stubborn chin. Watching Daniel hold their son for the first time, seeing the wonder and love on his face, Natalie felt her heart might burst from happiness. "He is perfect," Daniel whispered, carefully supporting the baby's head. "I never thought I could love anyone as much as I love you, but this little one just proved me wrong." "I know what you mean. It's like our hearts just keep expanding to hold more love." They had 2 more children over the next 5 years. A daughter named Ellen Sarah, after both their mothers, and another son named William, after the lawyer who had helped them defeat Thornton. Their house was always full of noise and laughter, and the chaotic joy of a growing family. Natalie's parents remained healthy and active, running the general store with renewed energy now that they were free from debt and fear. Sarah's illness went into remission, giving her precious extra years to enjoy her grandchildren. Robert became one of the cooperative's strongest supporters, using his store as a central hub for the ranching community. The cooperative itself grew beyond anyone's expectations. It expanded to include ranches throughout the San Juan Mountains, eventually becoming a model that other regions studied and replicated. Daniel's role grew with it. He became known throughout Colorado as a fair negotiator and skilled organizer, someone who could bring different parties together and find common ground. Tom Patterson retired after 10 years as the cooperative's president, and the members unanimously elected Daniel to replace him. He was hesitant at first, uncomfortable with the title and the authority it represented. But Natalie convinced him to accept, reminding him that leadership wasn't about power, it was about service. "You spent your whole life running from the idea that you could make a difference," she told him. "But you do make a difference. You did then, and you will now. These people trust you because you have never let them down, because you lead by example, not by decree. That's the kind of leader we need." So Daniel became president, and for the next 20 years, he helped guide the cooperative through expansion, economic downturns, changes in the cattle market, and all the challenges that came with running a large organization. But he never forgot where he came from. He never stopped being the simple cowboy who stepped between guns to protect strangers, who believed that people mattered more than profits. As they grew older together, Daniel and Natalie's love only deepened. They had weathered storms together, built something lasting, raised a family, and created a legacy. They still made time to sit on their porch in the evenings, watching the sun set behind the mountains, holding hands and talking about everything and nothing. One evening, when they were both in their 60s, their children grown and starting families of their own, Natalie looked at Daniel and smiled. "You remember what Thornton said? That last day in the church, he said I would regret choosing you, that poverty wouldn't keep me warm at night." "I remember. I also remember thinking he was the most miserable rich man I had ever seen and wondering how he could be so blind. We were never poor, not in any way that mattered. We had each other, we had our health, we had work that meant something, we had friends and family who loved us." "That's wealth. That's what it all means. Wealth is measured in happiness," Daniel said, that phrase they had repeated to each other thousands of times over the decades. "And by that measure, we have been millionaires our entire married life. I wouldn't change a thing. Not a single moment, not even the hard times, because it was all ours. We chose it, we built it together, and that makes it precious." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out one by one. Somewhere in the house behind them, they could hear their granddaughter laughing, visiting with her parents. The ranch stretched out around them, peaceful and prosperous. The mountains stood eternal, unchanged by human drama, a reminder that life was brief and should be lived fully. "I love you," Daniel said, the words as fresh and genuine as the first time he had spoken them more than 40 years ago. "I love you too. Always have, always will." Years later, when the Fosters were gone and their story had passed into legend in the San Juan Mountains, people would still talk about them. About the woman who refused to be bought and the cowboy who stood beside her. About the community they built and the empire they helped dismantle. About the power of standing together against tyranny. But most of all, they would talk about the love story at the heart of it all. The simple, profound truth that Natalie and Daniel had proven with their lives. That wealth is measured in happiness. That love and partnership matter more than money and power. That choosing your own path and fighting for it is worth any sacrifice. Their grandchildren would pass the story down to their own children, adding details and embellishments until the tale took on mythic proportions. But at its core, it remained what it had always been. A story about two people who met in a moment of danger, fell in love despite impossible odds, fought together against injustice, and built a life of meaning and purpose. The ranch Daniel and Natalie built remained in the family for generations, a testament to their hard work and vision. The cooperative they helped create continued to serve the ranching community, evolving with the times but holding fast to the principles of mutual support and fair dealing that had been its foundation. In the town of Silverton, a plaque was eventually placed in the church where they had married, commemorating the confrontation with Marcus Thornton that had changed everything. It read, "Here stood the people of Silverton against tyranny. Here love triumphed over greed. Here we learned that wealth is measured in happiness, not dollars." The final word belongs to Ellen Sarah Foster, Daniel and Natalie's daughter, who wrote in her journal late in her own life about her parents' legacy. They were not perfect people. They made mistakes, they had doubts, they struggled with all the normal challenges of life. But they loved each other completely, honestly, without reservation. They showed me what a true partnership looks like. Two people standing side by side, facing the world together, each making the other stronger and better. They taught me that courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite fear. They proved that ordinary people can change their world if they refuse to accept injustice and work together toward something better. Most importantly, they showed me that happiness is not something you find or receive, but something you create through the choices you make every single day. I am who I am because of their example. We all are. That is their true legacy, and it will endure long after their names are forgotten. But their names were never forgotten. In the San Juan Mountains, where the peaks touch the sky and the air is thin and pure, where hard work and honest dealing still matter, where communities still come together to help neighbors in need, Daniel and Natalie Foster are remembered. Not as heroes, though they were heroic. Not as legends, though their story became legendary. But as real people who faced real challenges and chose love over fear, partnership over possession, happiness over wealth. And in the end, that was the truest measure of their success. Not what they accumulated, but what they built. Not what they owned, but whom they loved. Not how they started, but how they lived and how they were remembered. They had been promised nothing and given everything that truly mattered. They had faced down power with courage, confronted injustice with unity, and built a legacy of love that endured. Their story ended not with a dramatic confrontation or a sudden revelation, but with the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived. They grew old together on the ranch they had built, surrounded by children and grandchildren, secure in the knowledge that they had made the right choices. When Daniel passed at 78, Natalie held his hand and whispered that she would see him again soon. When Natalie followed him 2 years later, their children gathered around her bed and heard her final words. Tell them it was worth it. Tell them love is always worth fighting for. And so the story ends where it began. With love, with courage, with the simple but profound truth that our choices define us. That standing together we are stronger than any tyrant, and that wealth, true wealth, is measured not in gold or land or cattle, but in the happiness we create and share with those we love. Daniel and Natalie Foster chose each other when the world told them they should not. They chose to fight when surrender would have been easier. They chose to build rather than accept. And in doing so, they created something that lasted far beyond their own lives, a legacy of love and courage that inspired generations. The mountains still stand watch over Silverton, Colorado. The cooperative still serves the ranching community. And somewhere in the thin mountain air, the spirit of two people who dared to choose love over security, partnership over possession, happiness over wealth, still lingers like a blessing on all who remember their story.